What's up, nerds? Today I want to talk about a concerning report coming out of Ukraine. It is a Russian sequel that nobody asked for, Maidan 3. Of course, today you know that we live in the age of sequels. All the different movie studios are just hammering sequels that nobody asked for because nobody's able to come up with good ideas. I saw a trailer for Twister 2. Twister 1 was obviously one of my favorite movies ever made. And so nobody asked for Twister 2. Nobody watched the first Twister and said, oh, gee, I wonder when they're going to make a second one. No, the first was fine. Don't make a second one. The second one looks cheesy. But anyway, Russia wanted to take a page out of Disney's Bob Iger's playbook. They're just going to run back these sequels until ratings improve. And this takes us to Maidan 3. Now, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a sequel to the 2014 Maidan Revolution, except in Russia's mind, they're wanting it to go the opposite direction. If you remember what happened in Maidan, I guess we'll call it Maidan 2, it's nicknamed the Revolution of Dignity by Ukrainians. This was basically the revolution that overthrew the Russian-leaning incumbent president Viktor Yanukovych. Now, Yanukovych ultimately had to flee to Russia, and this installed the new Ukrainian president who was more European-leaning. And of course, that is really the true start to this war between Russia and Ukraine. Russia exploited the chaos to annex Crimea, and they took over parts of the Donbass. And yeah, that's really where we were pretty much until 2022, whenever Russia began to basically rerun its invasion, albeit without an internal revolution. Maidan 2 is pretty bad, all things considered, because of how chaotic it was for Ukraine. However, at the same time, it is a true inflection point for Ukraine because it flipped from pro-Russian to pro-Ukrainian. Now, getting to Russia right now and present day and why they would want another revolution, well, of course, their battlefield results are not going too well. Things have really started to slow down all across the front. Even though Russia has managed to take Avdiivka and some of the small towns to the west of Avdiivka, really straightening the line out, it came at tremendous cost. And Russia is still continuing pressure all across the front line, especially down towards Robotnia. But at the same time, again, it's costing them tremendously. And the line hasn't really led to any kind of significant breakthrough on either side. Now, but that being said, the situation is so incredibly difficult for Ukraine. So let's not get it twisted there. But despite having said all of this being said, Russia has not abandoned its original war aims, which is for regime change in Kiev. They are wanting to flip the regime back to a pro-Russian sphere, and that gives them more influence in the region. And of course, that takes us to Maidan number 3, the sequel nobody asked for. This would make it a trilogy. And of course, I'm pulling all of this from an alert that came from Ukrainian intelligence. There's a link down the video description. You're free to check it out as well. This is just a general summary of it, but the name of the game for Maidan number 3 is chaos. The Russians want to sow chaos and distrust all across Ukraine. They want to pit different political factions against each other, pit other kinds of factions against each other. They want to create distrust between the civilians and the military, between the military and their political leadership. And we can kind of see some elements of this kind of playing out, and how some of this may even be grounded in like the slightest bit of truth, albeit exaggerated and taken out of context. But the overall goal for this chaos is to disrupt Ukrainian mobilization. Of course, we're talking about a potential another round of mobilization in Ukraine. However, again, there are a lot of political challenges to that. But at the same time, Maidan number 3 appears to be another challenge towards that as well. Of course, some of the ways that they want to disrupt mobilization is by spreading disinformation about battlefield losses and overall fatigue amongst foreign backers of Ukraine. Now, some of this is actually grounded in truth. I mean, Ukraine has taken some pretty substantial losses throughout this conflict, including some pretty high-profile losses. We've seen a few M1A1 Abrams tanks be destroyed. And all those aren't necessarily, big whoop. Russia's lost how many tanks in this conflict? But at the same time, the M1A1 Abrams, just because Ukraine has received so few of them, and they're kind of like a prestige platform at this point. So that can kind of get misconstrued and say, look, we're destroying your Abrams. It appears that, Ukraine has recently lost another HIMARS or a HIMARS system. And so these are some losses that Russia can kind of put up in the media and say, look at, you are losing a lot of equipment right now. Even if that equipment had been lost, over a month's, several months' time, we're seeing these videos be released now. And that kind of makes me wonder if, this is all part of this campaign. But of course, we also see fatigue in foreign support. Of course, we've got the U.S. elections coming up, and we've got the gridlock in Congress, basically preventing more Ukrainian aid from being passed. Europe is really starting to step up right now, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But that is becoming a huge topic right now in Ukraine, especially more with the United States than necessarily Europe right now. But of course, one of the big targets right now for this campaign is President Volodymyr Zelensky. Obviously, Russia wants regime change, and so they're going to create doubt on the legitimacy of Zelensky and his administration. They're going to target decisions that he's made. They're going to question those decisions. And one of those decisions could even be the firing of Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny was a very popular figure in Ukraine, is a very popular figure in Ukraine. And there's kind of those rumblings on tensions between Zelensky and Zaluzhny, and Zelensky's paranoia of Zaluzhny's potential political ambitions. But at the same time, some of that might be even taken out of context. I'm having to kind of start to, take an account of some of the information that I've received on this issue, and kind of start to question, okay, how much of this is legit and how much of this is blown out of proportion by some of these disinformation aggregators that might be kind of either acting on behalf of or acting as useful idiots for this campaign. Of course, another big topic right now with Ukraine politically is the election. This was supposed to be the year of another election in Ukraine, and pre-war Zelensky was pretty unpopular. Of course, now he's completely changed the image of his legacy, but with the war going on, Ukraine's probably not going to have another election. And so, of course, that is something that is going to get called into question and targeted by Russian intelligence agencies saying, like, look at how corrupt this president is. He's not going to have another election. Is he becoming more authoritarian, for instance? And again, potentially, some of that might be grounded in a degree of truth. But again, we're talking about things getting blown out of proportion, taken out of context, exaggerated, and that causes confusion and distrust. Now, the reason I'm saying that some of the things we might have already seen is because this has already begun. We are currently seeing Maidan number 3. Aren't we so excited about that? But this, Ukraine is saying that this should culminate sometime between March and May of 2024. But that's not necessarily going to be the end of this overall operation. This is really setting the stage for what Russia wants to do later. We'll talk about that in just one moment. But Ukraine points out that Russia has invested over $1.4 billion in different disinformation products, and this is by far the most expensive disinformation campaign in Russian intelligence service history. That's pretty impressive. That's a lot of money. That would be a shame if it did not work. That's a lot of wasted money. But at the same time, like we started with the intro, ask Disney. They invested a lot of money in sequels. People did not seem to like those. So maybe Russia's about to learn the same lesson. But the culmination of this goal is, of course, to sow panic and chaos in Ukraine throughout May, and then exploit that chaos with a battlefield victory in the east in June. We're going to have to see a little bit more chaos to make that make any sense. But of course, we also need to see Ukraine declare mobilization for this operation to target. In either case, Ukraine kind of does need more bodies, so something's going to happen at some point. But it appears that the first phase of this operation had actually failed, at least according to Ukraine. Protests are still expected to form in the near future, and they're expected to create some more distrust and confusion about the overall conflict. But again, we're just going to have to wait and see. Now, overall, I think this is a very interesting report. I have not seen a lot of people talk about this report, and I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, kind of this, Russian intelligence operations in Ukraine since the war started, or especially, this year. Russia's pulling out of the stops. They have to win this war. Politically, economically, militarily, everything. They are putting all their chips in this conflict. And so intelligence operations like this, they're not a shock to see. However, it's kind of interesting seeing Russia actually struggle to succeed at intelligence operations. Remember, before the war, the image of Putin was that he was incredibly adept at intelligence operations. He knew when to pull his punches. He knew when to punch. And he was incredibly effective whenever he did land a punch. In this case, Russia is basically running into a hornet's nest because they're not going after a country that is necessarily unsuspecting towards Russian information operations. They're going towards a country that they're at war with. And, Ukraine's intelligence services are no longer slobs. We talked about a previous report about, CIA assistance in Ukraine. I'll have that video pinned at the end of this video. But, we've seen the reformation of Ukrainian intelligence services and the impact that that's had not only on the conflict, but on Ukraine's ability to combat the Russian intelligence agencies. So they're not going at this against a green target. They're going after this against a battle-hardened, familiar, and aware target. And that's why we're seeing some of these operations actually start to fail. That being said, Western targets are still certainly very vulnerable. We haven't necessarily woken up to this threat. Even though we've been talking about it since 2016 and even earlier than that, we're still struggling to recognize when something is true and when something is false. We've got a lot of disinformation aggregators in the West. We've got a lot of useful idiots here in the West. And that's led to a lot of increasing politicization, not only regarding the war in Ukraine, but regarding other kinds of issues that distract from what's important. Think about what you've seen about the war in Ukraine. Some people are calling it a giant money laundering scheme. They're basically calling it, a money-making machine for defense contractors. Yes, defense contractors are making some money off of this. But at the same time, Russia attacked Ukraine because Russia wants to write the future for Ukraine. And Ukraine's a country. Ukraine has people, and they have a right to make their own decisions for themselves. So we see a lot of that disinformation still kind of get pushed off to the West, and we are much more vulnerable to that kind of attack. And that takes us to our individual responsibility to not amplify disinformation or misinformation. We have to do individually our own research. And if you're watching this video, don't just watch, this video and hear what I say and take it as, truth. Watch this video, hear what I say, and then do, more research. Maybe I make a mistake, and that happens. I tend to be kind of dumb sometimes. So, and if I make a mistake, I definitely appreciate it if you let me know down in the video comments so I know. That is helpful for me, and I will receive that. But that being said, there are a lot of disinformation products out there. There are a lot of disinformation sources out there, and so you have to cast as wide a net as possible to catch as much information as possible to make sure that, you are not receiving just disinformation or even a lot of disinformation. You want the truth to drown that stuff out. So with all that, we'll see what happens in Ukraine. Let me know what your thoughts are on this terrible sequel, and let me know what your thoughts are on sequels in general. Did you see the Twister trailer? What are your thoughts? I thought it looked very, it looked all CGI'd, and I haven't seen the first Twister in a minute, so I need to run it back. But I don't remember the CGI being like that terrible. Maybe I'm just getting picky, but I don't know. You can't replace Bill Paxton. You just can't. But anyway, with all that being said, like this video if it was helpful or informative. I'll see y'all later. Bye.